How to install a mini split system from start to finish. Our bracketry is going to go something like this. Let's go ahead and loosely put our second bracket on. So we're going to try and keep this as far away from the wall as possible. Bracket is good to go. So now that our condenser is mounted, the next thing we're going to do is lay out the hole. We're just going to take this screw out and we're just going to pull down on these tabs right here, and this is what we're going to mount on our wall. This is roughly where we're going to put it, so we're going to look for our studs. So there's obviously a stud here, so we're going to go ahead and mark that. You need to have 6 inches of distance from the ceiling, and we're just going to go ahead and mark where our holes are. Now this is the chase that goes into the wall. So we've got this laid out. You don't have to get crazy, just a little bit. And we're gonna run our vacuum so that we're not spitting out a bunch of dust here. So we're just using a hammer drill here with a small bit. Again, we're just using this kind of as a pilot. So we're just gonna line up our hole here and let her rip. Now what we're gonna do is we're just gonna feed this in. This is just gonna act kind of as a protectant against rubbing against this brick. Okay, so this is something that I recommend that a lot of the other videos don't show. We're gonna go ahead and pop this cover off, and this is going to allow us to move the refrigerant lines so that they're straight up and down 90 degrees. So this is what I like to do. A lot of people just say to bend this to where it's 90 degrees. I like to actually cut the insulation at this bend and just verify that there's no kinks. If you don't, you won't really know, and you could get the system put in and have problems, and we'll reattach this later. And you're just gonna slowly work this 90 degrees, and you're just gonna physically look at it, make sure there's no kinks. Once you have that and you've confirmed that there's no kinks, we're just gonna go ahead and re-wrap this. You can tape these together, but I always like to tape these separate, and then you can attach these just so they're easier to fish through that chase. Now, as you can see right here, you can choose to put your refrigerant and condensate piping out the side depending on your application. And if you wanted to do that, you would simply need to knock out this little tab and you can run your piping out there. So now that our line set is ready to go, the only other thing we need to attach is our communication wire. So all we're going to do is just pop this little cover off here, just like that. And as you can see, we're just going to have 3 communication wires, and these are our ground terminals here. So we've got this fed through the back side. Just for reference, this is the correct end. These ones will go at the condensing unit. And so to start with, what we're going to do is take this block off. This is just like a strain relief, so it keeps these wires from moving around or potentially getting pulled out of the socket. So we're just going to set that aside. And these do not matter as long as you just match white. If white goes to 1, just match it on the condensing unit, white to 1, and so on. Give it a pull, make sure it's in there good. We'll do red to number 2, just like that, and black to number 3. And then lastly, both of these are ground terminals. So we're just going to take our green like that. And that is it, folks. So you can take a picture at this point, put the cover back on, and then just make note of it when you hook the condenser up. So let's go ahead and put this back on. So that's done. We'll go ahead and close this, and we can go ahead and hang it on our wall, and it should be a permanent installation once we put it up. All right, so we've got our communication wires run into our hole that we just punched. And next what we're gonna do is we're just gonna continue feeding that out, and we're gonna feed the refrigerant lines in with it. All right, so what we're gonna do is push this in, and we're gonna angle it slightly to where this hook grabs onto that guy. Just like that. Make sure that's in fully, and then you're just gonna gently push on the bottom. And as you can see, they just snap into place. Just like that. All right, so the head unit is installed, and that's the finished product. All of the communication wires are already pre-installed, so I'm just gonna make our connections outside. All right, so our head unit is installed. This is what we have on the exterior. We have our condensate drain, and being as this is going right onto the roof, we're just gonna have it drain. It goes into that gutter down there, so that's really easy. Let's go ahead and take this off so we can access our refrigerant lines here. So everything is done on the inside. We just have enough room to where we can make our connection right here, which is fantastic. We don't have to connect this and then fish it through. We have our line set here with our 2 flared fittings, and this should still be under pressure. So when we take this off, you want to hear that nitrogen come out. That means that there's no leaks in the evaporator coil. So that's exactly what we wanted to hear. So what we're going to be using is Nylock Blue. This, as you can see, is compatible with all refrigerants. It won't contaminate anything. So what we're going to do is we're going to put this Nylock, I'm just going to put a little bit on this flare joint right here. Just like that. And we'll go ahead and attach these. They don't have to be crazy tight. Next, we're gonna do the same for our suction line here. Put a little bit of Nylock on there. So let's go ahead and make our connection here. We got just enough room to get our adjustable back in there to hold it tight. Before we put our flange on or finish insulating this, we're gonna do our bends here. So this one's gonna go to this one. So we're gonna make our cut here, and we're gonna flare that joint. This one, let's go ahead and remove this, and we'll re-insulate it before we're done here. Just gonna do a gradual bend here. So this one's gonna be about right here. So what we're gonna be using for these flare joints is the Navac flare tool. Before you do this, you wanna make sure that you have the flare nut on already. So we're gonna go ahead and remove this guy right here, and then we're just gonna pop out this little tab here. Slide that on. Now we can do our flare. Just gonna slide this on, just like that. Lock it in place. And just like that. Remove this. And as you can see, beautiful flare joint, really nice smooth surface on the inside there. And we're ready to make our connection. You don't really have to put any on this side because it will, once it seats, it'll get it on this surface as well. I'm just gonna go ahead and make this connection. We'll give that a snug. And that basically just gets the little lip off of the inside edge right here. Doesn't take much. So we're gonna feed our flare nut on here. Now we're gonna take our 1/2-inch fitting, slip it on, slide it until we hit that. Make sure it's good and snug. Slide this all the way in, lock it in place, and press our button. Beautiful flares every single time. Beautiful. All right, so we're just gonna slide this back over like that. Get our nylog put on here, and we'll make our connection. So that's one advantage to sliding this out as far as you can, is you have a little bit more wiggle room with your line set. All right, just gonna double check this one here. All right, both of these are good to go. So our system should be ready for the pressure test. So the next thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna run our communication line. So this is basically going to run through this guy. So we'll go ahead and pop these two out. All right, so we've got our mounting bracket here. We have our strain relief. Just so you can see the part number for that, it's a 1/2-inch NM cord connector, and basically it just seals this and makes it to where there's no movement and nothing is rubbing against it. So we're just gonna go ahead and strip these wires back. So we're just gonna match these with what we did on the indoor unit. So white was on number 1, red was on number 2, and black was on number 3. And lastly, our communication ground will go to here, and then our high voltage ground will go there. We're gonna leave that until we get our high voltage wiring done. So what we're gonna do right now is just temporarily attach that right there. We're gonna go ahead and do our pressure test, and then we'll come back to this last with our high voltage wiring. All right, so we got our nitrogen tank here, and this is what we have to use on a lot of mini splits that have a 5/16. This is larger than your standard residential service port, and as you notice, there's only one on the suction line. So this is gonna be a 5/16 female that threads on, and it has a Schrader core depressor. And then this is going to be a 1/4 inch, which will be the same as your typical manifold hoses, and it also has a Schrader core inside. So we're just going to take our yellow from our manifold, we're going to hook it up to our nitrogen, and turn on our manifold here, and we're just going to take our low side, make sure there's nothing still in here, and we're going to hook our low side up to this guy. Make sure these are closed. Turn our nitrogen on. As you can see, we have plenty of PSI. We're going to test this at about 200 PSI. So we're just going to start feeding in nitrogen on the low side through the blue hose. This shouldn't take much because our line set is only about 4 feet long. All right, so we're gonna let that stabilize for about 5 minutes, and then we're gonna use the tightness feature on our S-Man gauge. All right, so this has been sitting for a few minutes. We're gonna go ahead and press the tightness test, press enter to start. So as you can see, our timer has started, and this is going to give us our pressure drop. So we're going to test for about 10 minutes, and we'll see where we're at. We're starting at 207.98, somewhere in that area. All right, so here's our panel. It is a GE panel, and as you can see, we've installed our 20 amp breaker here. Now the way that these are laid out, if you have a double breaker, you have to give it a gap so that you're hitting both hot legs. So that's why we have this little gap here. But on our panel, you'll notice on our cover, we left this here because it's not up to code if you have an opening without a breaker there, because that's an electrical shock hazard. So we've got our breaker put in. What we're gonna do is we're gonna tap into one of these 1/2 inch tap outs. We're gonna run our MC cable up, and we're just gonna follow it along same path as this black cord, and we're gonna run it straight down out of the wall, and then we'll do weatherproof conduit up to our disconnect. All right, so we've got our breaker wired in. We've got our black and white wires attached there. Our ground is going to the ground lug, and we're just doing conduit here. We're just gonna run it all the way out to the exterior there where we'll put our disconnect. So we'll show you what it looks like. We're gonna go ahead and pop this cover on. All right, so now that we have our new breaker in here, as you can see, there's no gaps and we're good to go. So we're gonna go ahead and get our MC cable mounted nicely in this corner, and then we'll show you what it looks like once we get to the outside. All right, so we've been working on the electrical inside. As you can see, it's been 1 hour and 18 minutes. We're still at 207.9, so we're peachy on the pressure test. So we're just gonna make sure everything is turned off here, and we're just gonna crack our yellow line and let all of the pressure out, and then we can start our vacuum. All right, so we just got our hole drilled through this brick. We're gonna mount our disconnect right here, which is probably the easiest point to disconnect this if there is an emergency, instead of having to climb up there on the roof. And then we've got our weather tight conduit, 1/2 inch conduit. We've got the wire pulled through the proper length, and we've got one fitting. So this straight fitting will come out of here, and our conduit will come up and over up to the unit, and then we're going to cut it to length and connect it at the unit. All right, so we got our disconnect wired up for our load side. So as you can see on the panel here, load, so the AC unit would go on the outer two, and line from the house will go to the middle two lugs. So we got this pre-wired. Once we get our wires stubbed out here, we'll connect it to the line side, and then we'll be good to go. All right, so we've got our 5/16 Schrader core removal tool. This not only is a 5/16, but it goes from 5/16 for a mini split down to quarter, which is what our typical hoses are gonna be 1/4 inch. So really nice tool to have for mini splits. Then we have this ball valve that we can isolate our micron gauge in order to let the refrigerant in. And we have our CPS micron gauge, the True Blue massive hose to the Navac 4 CFM pump. So let's go ahead and cut it on. It's 4/16 starting our vacuum. So let's see how quick we can get it to where we need to be. This vacuum pump has a slow start. It can run for 60 minutes on a full battery. This is a 9 amp hour Milwaukee, and I've got the Makita to Milwaukee adapter. I've got a separate video on how I made that work. But if you're curious on that, leave me a comment in the comments section. So I can typically pump down a system in 10 minutes. That means this system will pump down over 5 systems on one battery charge, which I really love. So we just got that opened up. Again, it's 4/17. So let's see how quick we can pump this down. This line set is only like 3 feet long, so this shouldn't take very long at all. I forgot to mention too, obviously the Schrader core has been removed. And one thing that I want to mention on these is if you go to attach this to your Schrader core, you need to actually give it pressure and you will feel this click into place, and then you can remove your core. Because otherwise, if you don't feel that click, the Schrader core will not stay stiffly in this rod here. So we're at 110 microns already, and it has been 2 minutes. All right, so we're at 48 microns. We're gonna go ahead and isolate. We're gonna shut down our system. So the line set is now isolated. We're at 100 microns. We're going to let this sit for about 5 minutes. And as long as we don't rise above 500 microns, we are tight. And then we'll be ready to go ahead and let the refrigerant from this pre-charged unit into the line sets. For any of you that are wondering, all of these condensing units, mini splits, as well as residential systems are all pre-charged, and they're set up for up to, normally it's about 15 feet. I'm not sure what a mini split is as far as how many feet it's good for, but we should be sufficient. We might actually need to recover a little bit on this one because the line set is so short. So anyways, we're gonna let this sit. I don't see any indication that we're gonna have any sort of leak. So I'm gonna go ahead and disconnect my vacuum pump. And the last thing we have to do is get our electrical hooked up here. We've got it routed. We just have to run it along and connect it right here. All right, so our disconnect is installed. So we have our wires coming from the garage, going to these middle two, and for the AC going out here. Everything is sealed back behind there, and we can go ahead and pop our disconnect in. All right, so that's done. We have our liquid tight going up. We're gonna follow this all the way to the AC unit, and then we will be ready to go. All right, so it's been 10 minutes. We've risen to 230, so we are tight. As long as we're below 500, we are totally good. So with that being said, the last thing we need to do is open up our valves. And what I've been told is to open the high side slowly. So that's what I'm gonna do. Just gonna crack this line. I had my ball valve up against the thing, so I couldn't close it, but I'm convinced that these are not affected by the refrigerant. So half the time I don't even have this, but I just recently got that ball valve. So we've got that one cracked. We're gonna let it sit for a second, and then we'll open this up all the way. We've had this one cracked for a couple minutes now, so we're gonna go ahead and fully open both of these. And we're just gonna loosen this until it seats, and you don't have to go far past that. Just get it to where it stops and you're good to go. So next what we're gonna do is we're gonna pop our Schrader core back in, and then we will be ready to finish our electrical and we'll be done. So what we're gonna do here is slide this in. I'm gonna thread on this end piece. We're going to open this, and you notice that that kicked out. Now we're going to feed it in. It's kind of hard to do with two hands or one hand, but tighten that till it's snug, and that's it. Pull that back out. Next, something that I always try and make it a habit of, don't go ahead and remove this. Remove this piece first. A little bit of oil came out there. And slowly open this to make sure that that valve core is doing what it's supposed to be doing. Okay, there you go. So sometimes if your valve core is not fully seated, maybe you thought it was and you went ahead and removed this, and all of your refrigerant comes dumping out when you take off your core tool. So another thing that I make it a habit of doing. All right, so this is the last thing. We've got our liquid tight here. We've got line 1, line 2, and ground. All of our communication wires are set up. So we're just gonna put this wire holder back on, put this on, and we will be ready to fire the system up. Well guys, the system is up and running. We got everything sealed up here. This unit is so quiet. So customer is really happy, and we just got this job wrapped up.